Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Probably Cancelled podcast in coalition with the Midwestern Marx Institute. My name is Bridget, and I'm your host. And today I am here with my guest, the wonderful Catherine Liu, right? Catherine Liu,
Okay.
is that correct?
Uh-huh.
Who
hmm
is a professor of film and media studies at UC Irvine. She's also the author of Virtue Hoarders, the case against the professional managerial class that came out in 2021,
hmm
if I
hmm
recall correctly. And she's been making quite a few waves since then, critiquing the left from a position that I really appreciate. And I know a lot of my listeners would really appreciate. And so when I discovered your work, I just knew that I had to immediately reach out to you and have you on. So welcome to the podcast, Catherine. I'm super
Hey,
happy to
thank you
have
for
you here.
having me. Great to be here.
Thank you. Yeah. So just to start off, I always like to ask people about their personal political journey and how you've come to where you are today politically. Do you mind sharing that with our audience real quick?
Uh, no, not at all. When I was growing up, I'm much older than you guys. It was the 1970s, and it was a time when there was still a lot more working class power in America, just cultural, political, and every level. And I like to remind people of this because people of my generation experienced this, but I think people of your generation lived with austerity and just thought that these were the way things were. But my public school was in a not very wealthy suburb of New York City, Mount Vernon, right outside of the Bronx. And we had free music lessons. We had the entire upstairs of the public school, which was built during the Workers' Progress Administration in neo Gothic form. It was an art studio, and there was all this material, painting, um, rope making, paper mache, just dedicated art studio, dedicated music. And our classrooms were beautiful, they were small, and they were well provisioned. And now I raised my son in one of the wealthiest suburbs in California, maybe the world. And all of these things like art and music are add ons that the PTA has to raise money for. And all of this
Mhm.
comes out of the California tax revolt and Reagan era austerity. So public goods have been undermined within my lifetime in such a profound way. Like even the simplest social democratic redistribution of wealth just through the public schools has been stopped, dead in its tracks. Um, so I saw that transformation. But the other thing that was happening in my family, which is very peculiar, was that my father worked at the United Nations, and we would go back to China every 2 years because the UN was set up like a colonial British institution, which is that you have home leave every 2 years because it's viewed as a hardship for you to be away from the home country, which was London at that time. But in the UN, it was for all the employees. They had a fully paid trip every 2 years to China. And there were very, very difficult times in China. We began by going in the early 70s. I continued to travel there with my family to the mid 80s and until I went by myself. But and my father was part of like a serious group of um, Marxist leftist New York dissidents who were Chinese, and I was like really interested in their discussions. He was, but his ideological commitments were not that deep. But I became like really interested in um, a Marxist understanding of history, and I sort of like the little ears, like was overhearing what the adults were talking about, and the idea of worker dignity, worker autonomy, like basic issues about capitalism, the class struggle, and anti-imperialism was sort of in the air in the 70s too, and then in my family in a very concentrated way. Not that anyone else in my family cared about these things, but I just had it in the air. And then um, I went to Yale as an undergraduate, and I was on like four different kinds of scholarship. And I didn't really, I was hustling, and I just thought I had to keep up with these rich kids, and it was really scary. But I did have a couple of, one in particular, when I look back on him now, Marxist professor named Richard Halperin. And he really, we read Marx together in class, and it really opened up my eyes to like these things that people were talking about when I was younger, but like seeing them in the text form. And I was also just very, very suspicious of like the Cold War version of liberal ideology, because the Cold War official lines on China were that, these are um, it's a gray and uniform society with persecuted people, and everyone is like a robot going into work. You have no choice, and it's very oppressive and it's totalitarian, and everyone hates the Communist Party. And I would go to China, and it certainly was very different from America. It was very, very poor. But because my father's family were mainly peasants, like they had material improvements in their lives, and they weren't like coached to speak to us in certain ways in family time, but they'd be like, oh yes, we're doing this collective farming, and my husband has joined the army, and I take care of his family. It was like a very strange combination, very traditional Confucian ways of looking at things, but also a very like optimistic and collective life that my family had, because they were poor peasants, and things were getting better through the especially after Deng Xiaoping comes to power in '76, and things, there's a little more freedom in terms of like farming your own land and things like that. And you could see that there was a lot of struggle for what the right way was to go in China, and there were some really like um beautiful things about a life, like experiencing a life in a kind of pre-capitalist world, because it's gone now in China. Like with my family and um, my aunts and cousins and everything, there was no TV, there was no entertainment after in the evenings, except for storytelling and singing, and a lot of the stuff. Culture was Cultural Revolution stuff, peasant songs, things like that. And then I'd come back to the States, and I'd be in my high school history class or social studies class, and they'd be like, China and the USSR, gray lands of totalitarianism where the people are oppressed and ready to overthrow their rulers, but they have no power. And I'd be like, this is just a lot. I actually got into really big trouble with my history teacher in like 10th or 11th grade, because I raised my hand and I was like, Mrs. Schwartz, this is not right. This is not, I've been to China. This is not. I was like, um, probably a mouthy 15-year-old. And she literally said this to me. I will never forget this. She goes, Kathy, you open your mouth again about this, and I'm going to put my size 8 shoe in it. I don't want to hear from you right now. Because I was just like, I object. And I was like, wow, we live in a democracy, right? We're supposed to have all this freedom, but I'm actually not allowed to express a dissenting view. And the end of the story is not so happy. I actually walked out of class. I was like, "You threatened me!" Like this was before girl boss hashtag whatever in feminist circles. Like girls have to stand up for themselves. I was just like, I'm not going to be threatened physically, and I was like being abused at home too. So, but I had this like very strong sense of myself because I was such a nerd and just a good reader. And the counselor and the teacher had to come in, and my teacher and my mother met, and my mother took the teacher's side, but I was like, I'm not going back to the class until someone apologizes to me. And I took a stand, and I realized that I wasn't going to win this war, but I was going to be suspicious of propaganda, of American propaganda. And I was not going
Mhm.
to take anything that they said about international, like the government or the schools or anything, they said about international relations, other countries at face value. Like that was a really important formative moment for me. And that I also understood, like, if you stand up for what you believe in, you will be in trouble. Like you will I literally got in trouble, and I was like a straight A student and everything. So my convictions, my leftist convictions were always very, very deep. But when I went to college, the big thing was feminism. And everyone's like, oh, I'm a feminist. I didn't realize it was second wave feminism that was actually trying to demolish old school socialist working class feminism. I was just like, oh yeah, feminism, that makes sense. Like women have been excluded from government and all these other things. Um, but I was really uneasy with a lot of the methodological and intellectual underpinnings. I'm sorry, is this going on for way too long?
No, please say as
Okay,
much as
sorry.
you would like. No, I
Okay,
love this.
this is you asked me about my political past, and then I decided to tell the story, never quite in this way. So I'm really glad for the opportunity. But so I'm like, and then deconstruction was really cool, and so it was like feminism, deconstruction, psychoanalysis. But I had this
Yeah.
core formation of like reading Marx by myself, reading the Frankfurt School that I discovered by myself because I was really interested in the Enlightenment and rationality and reason. And nobody was reading these things because it was the end of the Cold War, it was cultural studies, and the feminists could say, the second wave feminists could say, oh, Marxists, they're so sexist and
Misogynistic.
yeah, it's the patriarchy, and the cultural studies people were like, oh, we can't criticize popular culture because that's what the people like, and the strains of Marxism that I did come into contact with later were like Frederick Jameson, who passed away, R.I.P. But it was very culturally based, right? There was no sense of class as a dynamic that was a driving force in history, and I had actually seen like there was a lot of lip service to the working class in China, which were because there was no industrial working class before the revolution. They divided as workers, peasants, soldiers. Right? These were people who the government wanted to promote in terms of their interests against a kind of urban literal elite, and so there was a lot of um, government communist sponsored definitions of cultural of the class struggle, right, from top down. But I also saw from the 70s and 80s onward that the American working class was being undermined from the top down, on every single level. And one of the things I was wondering was what about myself is like why I feel so close to the American working class. I mean, partially my one of my aunts is a member of Unite Here Now. She's a hotel worker. She's a unionized hotel worker who has not retired, who works at the Four Seasons, who loves her union, who does not really speak English. And her union is this like educational um, institution. It's an integrative institution. It like has won her so many rights. She loves it. Ask any other professor in America if they have a non-college educated union member in their family, and I don't think you're going to find that many. So I mean, maybe like 1%, but
Hmm.
I often feel like she's a sort of moral compass for me when these Dems come up with some new identitarian thing. I'm like, I wonder what my aunt would think about that, and that's like a
Exactly.
really good, for me, like a really good moral standard. Because rather than being like, oh yeah, pronouns, great, I'd be like, I wonder what Say would say if she had to introduce herself with pronouns like every during before every meeting, like after a long day of being on her feet doing room service at the Four Seasons. And if she wasn't organized, what if all of these like college educated people came in to her workplace and tried to organize her? Luckily, Unite Here Now is a really strong union, so they are unionized already. But can you imagine like trying to unionize workers with this like pronoun first kind of thing that people were doing after 2016 because everyone went crazy
Yep.
because of the first
Yep.
Trump thing, right? And the other
Yep.
thing was that I think that when I was growing up in New York, um, there was a much more organically integrated racial and class classroom. There was busing, but there was also like a really powerful connection with like old working class New York neighborhoods because this
Hmm.
suburb that I lived in was right outside of the Bronx, and a lot of like white working class Italian Americans, Irish Americans, African Americans, Jamaican Americans. This was like the first step to respectability, but we were like so close to like the working class neighborhoods of the Bronx, of Brooklyn, Staten Island, where they had come from. So that culture is really precious to me. Like, I don't see working class men and go, oh my God, they're such sexists. Oh my God, they don't know anything. They're like oppressing me. I just don't see that at all. I have to like put on my Karen glasses or something, to see them
Right.
as the enemy. I just don't. And I don't see working class women as like some kind of like male identified reactionaries or something. I just see them like as people who are whose struggles are like my struggles. I don't know. It's just so that's a lot of background. I had to hide my um real commitment to leftism until I finished my dissertation, and then I was revising it to become a book, and still I was disguising it because it was really unpopular. It's like the 90s, like it's go-go, economy. It's the new economy. It's all this. It's like Deleuze and Guattari. It's just all this like weird, like like veiled anti-Marxism, anti-materialism that's happening at the very elite levels of literary theory, cultural studies, everything like that. And I had a kid and I had to go along to get along. And I was just like, okay, I have to, get health insurance, keep my mouth shut. I guess I could have become a union organizer or stayed in New York. I went to Minnesota, and that was where I had my first job. And I really wanted to like pursue the life of the mind, but it was kind of like hiding there. And then, everyone's like, postmodernism this, postmodernism that. I was like, okay, I never used that term in any of my work. And then finally, like things turned my way in 2008 in the financial crisis. After the financial crisis, graduate students and students became much more seriously interested in in Marx. And today,
Hmm.
I feel like I have a place there, but still there are people in my university who are Marxist, and I'm not included in their Marxist um, worlds because I'm not like always talking about the labor theory of value or trying to have the perfect right reading of Marx or saying, you have to read Postone. I really think of Marx and historical materialism as a great way of understanding the present political situation and a great way of understanding culture industry and work and leisure and the entire problem of history is something that is made so exciting to me by trying to understand class struggle and kind of universal trajectory towards emancipation and whether or not technology and capitalism can serve that purpose of liberating the greatest number of people from exploitation as possible. Because if you know your history, you know that Marx too understood like the capitalist revolutions, the bourgeois revolutions of the 18th and 19th century, early 19th century, as revolutionary. And you're not just like
Hmm.
using class as a kind of moral category. You can understand the world and the way that it is as a formation of this kind of universal struggle. And you don't go around going, "Oh my God, I'm decolonizing the curriculum." Do you know what? Decolonizing the curriculum has not helped any colonial people. It's a narcissistic academic exercise that we perform to diversify like a range of authors, etc. But people right now, I think you're probably aware of this too, young people have so little understanding of history that
Right.
even teaching history to make it important, to make it seem important, I think can only be done through a historical materialist lens, because otherwise it becomes hagiography or empiricism or um, left virtue posturing. Like, oh, they were so sexist and patriarchal in the 18th century. Oh, that was a colonial thing. And we are at an inflection point in our culture where we are going to lose all repositories of knowledge of the past. And that's what capitalism wants, actually. It wants amnesiac um,
Hmm.
subjects who don't even know how to begin to question the status quo. And one way in which I began to understand like the importance of socialism and the socialist revolution was that under socialism, ideally, there would be enough surplus value and surplus time that anyone could be an intellectual or an artist if they wanted to be, and they wouldn't be like all part of the 24-hour, 7 day a week grind and the hustle culture that your generation has to be involved in just to survive economically. And in that kind of
Right.
world, you have no time. You have no time to think. You have no time to have an to be autonomous or dignified subjects within even liberalism. I mean, everyone's like talking about the collapse in educational standards, etc. A liberal democracy really depends upon citizens capable of reason. And ironically, I think that the we've never had higher educational attainment in the United States, but we've also never had like more um, I don't know, general ignorance about the stakes of just democracy itself. So um, um, we can talk about Trump later, but I do think that the rejection of liberalism by the electorate, the Democratic Party liberalism, is a kind of desperate popular expression of a need for something radically different. And that radically different thing is Trump right now, and it's pretty horrific, but we can see it in a positive dialectical way as this like popular demand for something not not the liberal authoritarian. That is not the liberal
Hmm.
authoritarian of
Right.
Obama, Biden, Harris.
Right. Something other than the status quo.
Mhm.
And man, what an interesting, I mean, what an amazing upbringing. And you being able to see the truth behind the lies that you were being taught in school and having, conversations and all these interactions with your family who are peasants in China. And then compared to your life in the university, which is really, I mean, in the 80s and 90s was the burgeoning of the gender studies soup of postmodernism. So you really got to see everything firsthand. And I feel like, I personally believe, I know it's not really a Marxist belief, but I believe in destiny, and I do think that you're probably destined to be in the position that you're in, to share your insights of what you've literally seen for yourself. So, I guess from there, do you want to just talk a little bit more about your work and like specifically your work and how I'm sure your life has informed the work that you do?
Um, Maybe I'll talk a little bit about this book that I've been working on for so long, which is called Traumatized. And we're in edits, and I hope we'll be in production, and it should be out next year, 2025, maybe at the end of the year through Verso. Um,
Nice.
it was, um, I was really at the, I was one of the witnesses of the beginning of trauma studies. Is this too academic for people?
No, no, this is perfect for this venue.
Okay. Okay. So, trauma studies, if you all don't know, if you haven't been exposed to it through liberal arts education, is a way of reading literature as testimony and confession to trauma. And it really began at Yale when I was in these seminars with these, um, the primogenitors of the discipline, Kathy Caruth and Shoshana Feldman, who are psychoanalytically oriented deconstructionists. And um, I found it very compelling at the time because I was a very traumatized person at the time. And I, I, I felt like maybe this was speaking to me. And now, when I look back upon the history of trauma studies and the emergence of trauma culture in the 70s and 80s, I really see it as a um, epiphenomenon or symptom of the rise of second wave feminism and the personal is the political imagination around political awakening. So, one of the deep roots of identity politics is this particular formation, because what it is based on is the fact that in the public sphere or in the academic world or in the professional world, Patriarchal culture has not recognized certain specific experiences to women, has not recognized our traumas, and has mistreated, rape victims, et cetera, because of these sexist, bad psychiatrists, policemen, etc. And so it emerged. Trauma studies also converge with the emergence of um, a kind of a feminist psychiatric practice that was going to take the symptoms of post-traumatic stress that they said was post-traumatic stress that were part of victims of sexual assault, women mostly, and they were saying these are symptoms, and this is a disease, this is a disorder that is like PTSD for Vietnam vets, because initially PTSD was introduced into the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistic Manual, by anti war, pro Vietnam vet psychiatrists and social workers. And when Judith Herman came up in the 80s and early 90s, she was like, we need to recognize that women who've been sexually assaulted display many of the symptoms that should be included in the DSM, and therefore they can get treatment. Insurance companies could then pay for treatment. It had a lot of policy effects. And there was a kind of advocacy Judith Herman did for um, proper treatment of women who had been victims of sexual assault. This is all good. However, there's a tendency in sort of the rap group consciousness raising second wave feminism politics of turning the political into the personal and the personal into the political, that everything became highly individualized, and it fed right into the culture of recovery and self-help that became very, very instrumental for women, especially who were, materially stressed by the decline of the family wage for male partners, the sexual revolution, economic insecurity for working class men, and the reconfiguration of the working class family, and deindustrialization, and the kind of um, hyper accumulation of prestige and capital for professional managerial class women who are emerging as a vanguard of the feminists, like who were able to say, like, my success is my political activism or whatever it was. Like, I think Hillary Clinton is a really good example of that kind of feminist. Um, and they were able to, and the details in the book, I don't want to go to too deeply, but they were able to take trauma and make it the focus of trauma studies and feminism at the time, was able to take trauma as a kind of personal affliction for which there could be a cure, that was a new understanding, very theoretical understanding of human suffering, that that could afflict anyone in any class. This, I think, is really important here, and I call it the gentrification of suffering. And it was run the 70s and 80s as the social movements and the unrest of the 60s lost steam. Elites configured child sexual abuse, um, female female victimization as points of advocacy, so that we could move away from class and actually demonize men, working class men, as the true enemies, and have the professional woman be the savior. And this is part of the PMC argument that I make, of vulnerable and weak victims,
Mm-hmm.
children and women. And the thing that um, it allowed women to do is identify with the subject position that received a lot of recognition from within these rap groups and everything. But it also was the imagination of a kind of history, a kind of political awakening that all these second wave feminists were talking about. Like, it's the aha moment when you realize, I realize it's all because I'm a woman that I'm oppressed, or it was because of my trauma that I'm acting out this way and doing drugs, sleeping with inappropriate men. You have this aha moment, and then you find like minded people and you create political change. So there's no like real organization or education necessary. It's just we all raise our consciousness together it is so crazy and countercultural. But what I think is really amazing is it's still the paradigm of intersubjective relations on the left. Like, we'll just raise the consciousness of one person at a time. Literally, they thought this, the hippies thought this in the age of Aquarius, and then like the whole paradigm will shift and we'll be in the age of Aquarius, right? We were in the age of Capricorn, now we're going to shift into the age of Enlightenment. And it's very much, I think, a way of deflecting and suppressing the kinds of solidarity that were necessary to create real political change in the forms of revolutions and powerful worker action. And this was a time when um, workers were being, and unions were being attacked by Reagan and Thatcher in England. And so we have this imaginary political change that will take place, that will be transformative, one individual at a time, with regard to a kind of new way of looking at things that the stupid people who haven't had their consciousness raised don't understand.
Oh man, I'm so excited for when that book comes out. That's actually like right up my alley as far as this podcast is concerned. And I mean, it started out as kind of like a Marxist feminist radical feminist tinge podcast, and over time I realized
Yeah, that's what I
how
thought
the
you were.
battle of
Yeah.
the sexes, yeah, well, it used to be, yeah, and then over time I really realized how the battle of the sexes is really weaponized against us, and how feminism has been leveraged specifically by entities such as the CIA to push down workers' movements and class consciousness, and also to keep women in a perpetual victim cycle, which I see all around me all the time, and I find that to be really psychologically damaging. And also just like the crazy, I would just hear the craziest rhetoric. And I mean, I've done multiple episodes on this at this point to kind of like process this mode of thought through. But then when you attach it to the therapy world and big pharma and those interests, that's like a whole other realm of
Yeah.
scary stuff. So I'm really glad that you're working on that and uncovering all of that, because somebody's got to do it.
I'm telling this story, and I have done like the research to make these arguments, but I want to make this research have, and the thesis, like, have some kind of usefulness for those, for confronting contemporary moments. In my work, I never felt like the goal. Well, I never wanted the goal to be like, oh, I'm the smartest person in the room, and showing off about that. But so often in my profession, there is this kind of like display of erudition that seems very empty to me. I really believe in good research. I really believe in well researched type theses, but I always think like the end is about um, ideology critique. Like, if we can get to undermining the ideological illusions that keep us separated and keep us down, that's what all good research should lead to. But I should say, like, it's second wave feminism that really does this. And Gloria Steinem has been found to be a CIA plant. You know this, and she
Yeah.
sued the authors of the book that had exposed her association with the CIA, so that it could never come out. But it's a great example of just like understanding the history of PM's professional managerial class, second wave feminism, so we're not duped by it. Because the
Hmm.
Democratic Party keeps wanting to be like, we're the party of women. Women don't even like them. Like, most women are working class. Most human beings are working class on the planet. Most people in America are working class. And like to swan around and talk about breaking glass ceilings instead of increasing wages and the minimum wage, it's not popular. It's just not popular. Even the abortion thing was driving me crazy. Like, at the DNC, they paraded all these women who were testifying to like their painful abortions or their inability to get an abortion. I was like, this is the image of women. This is what you think women care about. I'm sorry, women, this is falling so flat. Women are trying to feed their families, they're trying to pay their rent, they're trying to like have good relationships. If you really cared about women, you would have on the top of your platform universal single payer healthcare. Like abortion
Hmm.
would be part of that. But universal single healthcare liberates women from shitty jobs and shitty relationships. And that is like too socialist feminism for them.
Yeah. Or
Um,
maternity leave. Like, why do I hear no one even mentioning maternity leave? Something
paid
as basic
parental
as
leave
that.
for a year. You know
Yeah.
how much of a difference I had 6 weeks. 6 freaking weeks and
That's
the of
crazy.
paid maternity leave. But the only way I survived it was I had a fellowship. I was always like I had a fellowship so I could like, insert the fellowship into the 6 weeks and then like get a teaching schedule where I could have a babysitter twice a week because I had no money. And then so I was home 3 days a week, had the babysitter 2 days a week. It was just total hustle culture in a putatively progressive state of Minnesota. I think separating babies from their mothers at 6 weeks is child abuse. And that's
That's
like, and
totally.
it's maternal abuse. But we can't, but we are not even talking about those things. So there's a really strong and powerful tradition of women leftists from Emma Goldman to Rosa Luxemburg. They were always fighting the workers' fights, right? The fights for the working class. And in America, there was a long tradition of socialist feminism, which was attacked by McCarthyism and the anti communist Cold War mode. But these women were so important to their unions, a lot of them in the Service Workers Union, like Unite Here Now, in SEIU. They worked for UAW, but their visibility was not only damaged and their lives as well by McCarthyism and the anti-communist craze and moral panics of the 1950s, but they actually fought for visibility and legitimacy with second wave feminists and a second wave feminist one. And they thought,
Yeah.
you're just old school, old left types. It was a little bit like, Madeleine Albright and Gloria Steinem calling young women who are into Bernie bros. They just want to meet men. When I was coming up in the world, the feminists would say like, "Oh, you can't do that. That's so male identified." So it's about kind of purity politics. I can't believe that young women in your generation still have to go through this bullshit, but it's like they can't invent anything new, so it's all about control. It's all about political suppression of class and mind control in the way that they say they offer you a carrot. If you are a mouthpiece for this ideology, then you get real rewards. You get
Yeah.
grants. You get positions. You get in the university. You get to be um, sanctified by the PMC hold on non-governmental organizations and stuff like if you're like, oh yeah, I'm really into microloans from men in Sri Lanka, it's really interesting, and you're like basically a tool of capital saying you're helping these impoverished women in Sri Lanka, and you get to have your little NGO job, you get to come back to DC, go to law school, and you get to be uplifted into some governmental position, eventually become Samantha Power, Hillary Clinton. The other thing that they do is they let you work in a charity like the Children's Fund for a while. Like, I just help the children. That's where Hillary Clinton first worked in the
Hmm.
law firm Bush, went into corporate law.
AOC went to Africa spreading like different forms of birth control there so people would stop having babies. That was her like feminist work that she did before she ran for office.
Yeah, so it's just kind of like Peace Corps NGO feminism that doesn't upset the apple cart, doesn't say anything about redistribution, doesn't attack the class relations, and you're rewarded for that as as a woman, as a young woman. And I feel like we as women need to speak out against this because the knuckleheads in charge of the Democratic Party are like, we need a feminist Joe Rogan. Oh my God, the gender gap is so great. It's like you tell men they're toxic, and any woman who actually has controversial views like Joe Rogan, you just ride her out of town on a rail. Like Angela Nagel, they did that to her. They did this to Amber A. Lee Frost when she got. These are popular left wing women on social media who didn't obey the orthodoxy, and they were just. I mean, they're fine, but they're not a voice that these libs can handle because they're
Right.
like the dirtbag left, or they took a position on one issue that the Dem elites don't like. We have to line up on everything, like immigration, crime, gender, abortion. Like everyone has to like line up on that on those issues. And if you don't line up on any of those issues, even if you have more in common with the Dems than with the conservatives, they will fucking excommunicate you from the liberal world. And I, don't think this is freedom. I don't think this is good democracy. And I don't think this is good for working class women. It's really good. There was a study done by a bunch of social scientists. I have the citation somewhere where they said like bread and butter advocacy for raising the minimum wage for everyone, universal health care for everyone. Those programs help women, the majority of women, working class women, much more than anti bias training or diversity efforts in the boardroom and the C suite, and the breaking of the glass ceiling policies that people are putting into place at Morgan Stanley, at the top law firms, in the top finance departments, in the art world, where we have to have more women in the museum. Yes, women artists are really, really underrepresented, but those kinds of curated elite gender equality initiatives just don't touch the lives of the majority of women in America. And so the Dems keep losing, but their donor base is all like in the boardroom. So they just want to give money to these initiatives that um that leave the economic structure intact. But feminism has now been held hostage by people like Sheryl Sandberg and Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris. And we need to like find some other way of articulating women's causes as working class causes. So
Hmm.
I'm like so mad right now about feminism. I could say I also think that the Democratic Party and liberals and within academia and within the sort of PMC elite context, they were not content with victories about like um, female representation or female visibility or gay marriage. They had to keep pushing more vanguard gender theory things onto the political agenda because sounds somewhat conspiratorial. Once the working class accepts something culturally, the PMC has to like up the ante and make something more bizarre happen so that they can always leave the working class behind. Once the working class accepted women's equality, the working class has accepted gay marriage in this like really amazing way. Like in my lifetime, the transformation of views about gay marriage and gay people has been such a victory, right? But you're not like able to celebrate this as a cross class thing for working class gay people. They moved on to some to you can't do um gay studies. It has to be queer theory, that you have to queer things. Now suddenly like women can in heterosexual relationships can say that they're queer, and then you have to like deal with the trans issues. There are vanishingly small numbers of people who have gender dysphoria, but we have to highlight this as a civil rights issue because the PMC always has to lead on identitarianism. And once you have a civil rights victory that the majority of Americans accept, like women's equality and gay marriage, they have to constantly be finding other cultural vanguardist positions and celebrate them because it's hatched in a graduate seminar. A lot of working trans people I know from working class backgrounds resent being used by the Democratic Party in this way to create this kind of vanguard identity. Many of them don't want to be have that kind of attention. They feel more afflicted by capitalism. There are trans leftists who don't dare criticize this kind of trans politics because I did like 4 years ago, and I was told on Twitter, DM'd constantly, to kill myself, take Xanax, take you're such a transphobe, just go kill yourself. Like, this shit just happened, like, to anyone who was like, maybe this isn't the way we lead in our political messaging.
Well, it's
You
really
should kill
backfiring
yourself.
on them now. Yeah, you should. Yeah, you should. You don't deserve to breathe anymore if you have any kind of differing opinion about Z's or shoe self neopronoun. Like, what is this? What is any of this? And
You
I
put
mean,
that
I guess that's
AOC eliminated her pronouns last week, and you had that on the list
yeah.
of things to discuss. And I think it's really fascinating because she's like politically very savvy, and she was testing this stuff, right? And then she backed down from it. But do you remember, like 2 or 3 years ago, she and Nancy Pelosi posted on Instagram, "Happy Birthing Person Day" on Happy Mother's Day, on Mother's Day. People don't forget this shit, and she's like our great progressive hope now. But these types of politicians and these types of women, they don't have deep political convictions. Like, if they see something not happening, like it's not popular anymore, they'll back off from it. And
Hmm.
it's just pure opportunism. And people, like across the board, when they were interviewed after the election, were saying, like, we're just so tired of this kind of like fakeness. We're just so tired of these staged positions, and this kind of being talked down to. Yeah, Trump is an asshole, he's horrible, he's probably a dictator, but we feel like he's like authentic, like he's saying what he thinks, and everyone's like, oh my god, this is so horrible. But you don't have Trump without the corruption of liberal political rhetoric that we've seen in the past 15 years. I mean,
Hmm.
I will that image of Happy Birthing Person Day is
Oh
seared
my
into my
god.
brain. But
And
and
as
I'm not
mothers,
like,
it's like extra painful. I mean, it's just, and I see this and I gave birth last year, but I would see this type of language in all the doulas and midwives that I was searching for when I got pregnant and I needed
oh,
to
I
find
heard
somebody
about
to help me give birth.
I heard
All
about
of
this.
these midwives are suddenly like gender neutral language. You can't say the word breastfeeding, you can't say mother, you can't say, like, there's just all of their websites are now there, and a lot of them, they don't want to do this, but people will take the time to like message them on the internet and say, hey, just so you know, your language on your website is not inclusive and that makes me really uncomfortable and you need to change that immediately. And then to save their career, they'll change it, or else
Right,
someone will make a campaign against a midwife
right,
somewhere. So like all
right.
these people are just forced to eliminate. I mean, I guess word woman is a bad word now, so
Well, no, it's
yeah, I
back
don't forget.
now. Like, we can say it again. And a girlfriend of mine who gave birth a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, was telling me this, and I was like, "This is insane." Like, if you look at the longitudinal studies of transgender people and gender dysphoria, they say like the most accurate percentage of people with gender dysphoria is 0.075% of the human population with serious gender dysphoria. In 0.075%, let's say half of them are trans men. Let's say of the trans, so we're at 0.035%. But let's say of that 0.035%, like 1% or 5% of them actually have children. Like, we're talking a vanishingly small group of people, but and we don't want to exclude them, so we can't actually use gendered pronouns. It's like, I don't think those people want to be used in that way. But some of them, I think the majority of that vanishingly small group of people don't want to be used that way. Maybe some of them allow themselves to be used that way by liberals, but it is a total um, disrespect of women's biology and of like human tradition. It's difficult enough to the human biology and like the survival of the species. You just gave birth. It's difficult enough to give birth, to survive with your child, as it is, the medical care and the kinds of care that we get in America is bad enough as it is. Like, um, I had 48 hours in the hospital covered by insurance. I don't know how much you had. Do you know in China you have a month? You
Hmm.
there's like the sacred time of life for women after they've given birth, where you know maybe some of us would say like I want to stay in a hospital for a month, but there's like maternity wards where your family brings you food and you can be with your child and someone can take care of your child so you can sleep like that.
Hmm.
We don't have any shit like that, but we can't use gendered pronouns. Like, I would say, like, we can go through all these vanguard positions if we gave people basic provisions. Like Dems, go crazy, but give us universal health care. Give us a year's maternity leave. Give us a month in a special, maternity care ward for women and children if they want to stay there. Give us the social supports that we need to have children before you get into these arcane identitarian flourishes. And you know what? I'm even scared to say this because I've had such attacks on me, and the university is a place where a lot of these politics play out. But I've really decided, like, before I came on today too, I was like, you know what, it's time for us to talk about this stuff, and it's time for us to represent other points of view, because when I was being attacked like this, a lot of trans friends and trans people were DMing me being like, it's really horrible what they're doing to you. I would hate to have this happen to me. I hate you having my identity being used like this. But we were all so scared. We're all fucking
Hmm.
scared out of our minds, um, because of the viciousness of the attacks and because of probably cancellation at that time was like a very real thing that was happening. And then um, I am someone who believes that all the liberal institutions right now have are so low in trust, including science, including the government, including the university. How do we create greater trust? It's not by telling people how to use language in these arcane ways, I'll tell you that much. It's about actually having serious, objective, empathetic debates with people.
Hmm. And all of this is really, it's really backfiring. And I feel like we've reached the peak of the madness, and now we're starting to like see kind of just the tip of the other side, where hopefully things will die down with this hyper postmodernist academic. I
Identity.
don't know.
Yeah, I think
Yeah, I
we're
think
just
people are
hyper
seeing
identity.
it for what it is. Yeah, but I mean, it's cost them a lot of elections, not just the presidential election, but also local elections, for example. So, like, I'm curious to get your take on the election. This is the first episode I've recorded since Trump won. So, I'd love to get your personal analysis of the campaigns that both candidates ran, and then the results and the fallout from that. What do you think?
I think we're still sorting through it now, and one of the things that I'm most struck by, there are two things I'm really struck by, like, and it's taking a little bit of time to go through all the numbers and everything. But number one, Kamala burned through $1 billion in 100 days, and and her campaign is in debt. There are people who haven't been paid, like $20 million in
Hmm.
debt. So the
Beyonce got
mismanagement.
paid.
Yeah, Beyonce got paid, Oprah got paid. Like the way that she got all those celebrity endorsements that were actually buy-offs was is really appalling. And I was reading about how much she paid for data analytics, and I thought we had learned the lesson that you can't groom a campaign through analyzing data and analyzing focus groups, because that was the big mistake that Hillary Clinton made, was that she was so groomed through the through data, and they did it again. They did it again. I also think that all of these things that I was talking about with regard to the professional managerial class, the second wave feminists, and their ambition and pure power hungriness, and how they fit right into the status quo, is that the women of my generation, because Kamala and I are about the same age, the women of my generation who succeeded were all good girls. And I'm not saying like I didn't succeed, but I'm like succeeded in the liberal institutions. They were like, oh, were little Miss Perfect, but what they lacked was any kind of spontaneity or authenticity because they had been groomed from the very beginning to present themselves as like non-controversial, non-dissenting figures with regard to power. So there are many, many talented female politicians and lawyers of our generation, but the ones that have risen to the top are these classic good girls. They, and I'm using that in a very, very specific way. Like they're not going to question power. They're very identified with feminism as a mode of gaining more power. And
Hmm.
um, with regard to Kamala's Harris's previous campaigns, she was a really bad campaigner. She lost California during the first primary. And she's from California, and so her lack of popularity was part of her weakness as a figure, but she was selected by Biden because he made this promise that he was going to have a African American woman be his the vice president. And so within the pool of really accomplished African American women, he picked this woman who was going to not rock the boat in some way, but she was also, because she was so ambitious and unable to really be spontaneous, she was totally unequipped to actually be a political campaigner. There's something we love in America about the show. We love con men, we love showmanship, we love the circus. P.T. Barnum was the um the primogeniture of of salesmanship and the spectacle, and she couldn't do it. She couldn't perform. Hillary couldn't perform either. Why do we pick such lame women to actually be candidates to represent the party? I don't know. Like, she should have gone on Rogan, and she couldn't do it. She
Hmm.
didn't want to do it. It was like going to be a 3 hour interview. She needed to be scripted at every moment. And that script was being derived from some kind of data analytics. And I think the way that the campaign spent money was really about Chuck Schumer's idea that we were just that the Democratic Party, not we, oh my God, no, was the Democratic Party was going to try to peel off centrist Republican votes in the suburbs. That's all they cared about. And he said that in 2016, like, we can lose the working class, but we need to move the Republican centrist suburban voter to the Dem side. And when you see that kind of campaign happening, what actually happened was it depressed Democratic turnout because no one was excited about her candidacy. Like, Trump won with 71 million votes. He won the popular vote because Democratic turnout was low.
Hmm.
So I thought that was fascinating. I think that her inability to connect with ordinary Americans was what a huge handicap that people papered over because she was better at performing than Hillary. But she was still unable to like formulate a thought that hadn't been scripted by 100 handlers.
Hmm.
And there's something crazy about Trump, but he would say the craziest shit, and then the New York Times would say, "Oh, he's losing his mind. He's cognitively impaired." But he was unscripted, and the friends I knew who went to his rallies would say, out of interest, out of cultural interest, but also because they're like manual labor, working class guys. They'd say like there was just so much love for the guy. Like there'd be people, they'd be talking on, people would be giving out swag, and he'd ask them like, so where are you voting from, like, don't you think he's a little crazy? And people would be like, yeah, I know he's crazy, but I just really like him.
Yeah, I mean, and there's also the aspect that the Democrats now are basically neocons with pronouns in their bio. It's really interesting to see the shift that's happened just in my lifetime alone. How they don't, I mean, they're really pro-war. I mean, they love what's going on in Ukraine.
I love the
There's no
national
real
security state.
pushback. Yeah, it's really interesting how, and I mean, there have been polls that show that, I mean, Democratic support for the CIA and FBI has skyrocketed since 2016 in comparison with the Republicans. It's just a complete nosedive, and people are saying like we should abolish these institutions and abolish the Fed. And there's just been a complete like flip flop almost
Yeah.
of the old like the old ways, how the parties used to be when I was a kid. That's been really interesting to
Establishment. Yeah.
see.
Yeah, that has
Yeah,
been
that's been
really,
really interesting.
yeah. And the other thing I was going to say was that the Democratic Party just took for granted that minorities would vote for them, no matter what they did.
Mhm.
And the shift to the right in every minority demographic was also really interesting too. And I think people are saying it was inflation. Everyone like hated the incumbent administration that had overseen inflation, and inflation as a function of how difficult it was for people to make a living, live with dignity, put food on the table, pay the rent, that those kinds of material issues, the Dems would address as, but the economy is doing really well, unemployment is really low. It was just this kind of denial of the reality of everyday struggle, right? And people within the working class, within the non-college educated voter demographic, moved right in this really, really powerful way. The other thing that
Mhm.
people would say to me, when they would criticize my argument about how the Democrats have become the party of the professional managerial classes, up until this election, people at the lowest income level were still voting Democratic. So people below $50,000 a year salary were mostly blue. This election, it changed. Those people voted Republican, broke majority Republican, and people who made over $200,000 a year broke Democrat. So you have these two
Mm.
shifts on the income level. But you know what? There are more poor people in America than there are rich people. Like I don't know how to get this message into their heads. Like I don't want to be talking to the a lot of leftists have been like, we need to tell them to do this, this, and this. I had a week of that where I was like, God, someone should make me write a editorial for the Guardian. Someone in the Wall Street Journal wrote an article headlined, "It's class, not identity," and I was like, I could have written that article, but now I feel like I'm tired of like being like, let me tell you what to do. I feel like what I should be doing, my mission is to talk to people like-minded people like you, younger people like you, and to give support for dissenting leftist views. Like, fuck
That's what
them.
I'm
I mean,
trying to do.
I could probably like, I could probably make a lot more money, I guess, if I like got a New York Times op-ed. But fuck them. I'll just keep going on and just, we need to expand the conversation and not be like, oh, I'm Rahm Emanuel, James Carville. Like, can I just tell you, it's totally ridiculous. These people are so corrupt. They're so entrenched in the ideological machine, and so the the break the break with the Democratic Party on the part of um, non-college educated, low-income people of all races. That is the great lesson we need to take from. No one wants to hear
Mhm.
your bullshit when you can't put food on the table. No one wants to hear that bullshit.
And we don't want wars.
No.
We don't want wars.
It used to
We
be the
don't want
anti-war party. No,
Zelensky.
no.
Yeah, we don't want Netanyahu coming over and demanding more money from us. Like
Did you hear that
very few
Biden
people want that.
Biden just authorized the use of American weapons in Ukraine to fight Russia. So there's
Yep.
been like a low simmering war with Russia that the Dems
Yep.
want. The Dems want that. And
It's really
I'm
crazy.
not saying like Trump doesn't want it, but it really is like if there is no choice, if there's no difference between these two warmongering parties, then people are like, let's try our luck with another party because we've had 4 years of this and it's been really sucky and it's really sucks.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this is where we are now, and it's very hard for me to talk because I have a lot of lib friends. I like go along to get along because I can't have this argument with them because they literally like you can see them like they'll be like, I can't talk about that now, because I'll be criticizing the Democratic Party or Harris. They'll be like, I just can't hear that now. And I'm
Have they
like,
shaved their heads yet?
not yet, but if they thought he was a fascist, like why aren't they in the streets right now? Because like
Where are they at?
yeah,
Where
where
are
are
they?
those
Like, where's
pussy?
their January 6th?
I'm so glad that the pussy hats though are not around because I fucking hate that shit. But yeah, I can't I try not to talk about it just with my lib friends because they're like having cognitive breakdowns. But
Yeah.
I think that I need and we need to, talk to each other more and remain cool and objective and analytic and strengthen each other's positions. And that's that's more and more what I'm seeing is my positions. That's relentless critique of liberalism from for
Mm-hmm.
the left and from the left.
That's awesome. And I mean, yeah, that's all I ever really want to do. And when you do it, when you have the courage to do it and you say what you want to say, other people start doing the same. Or you
Yep.
get DMs from people being like, thank you so much for saying that. I'm so glad somebody finally said that. And eventually they'll start talking about it too, to
Yep.
people around them. And it is, we're making headway. We really are.
We
So,
are. We
man,
are.
I am really just so grateful for your voice, and you're welcome back anytime, literally anytime, to talk about anything you might want. And just for now, just to wrap up, can you tell our audience where they can find your work or get in contact with you, anything like that?
So I am still on X. I haven't gone to Blue Sky like the other like at and I tweet at Bureau Cat Lou, one word, Bureau cat. LIU, one word. And I have a Substack that has just been popping lately because of, the actuality, and it's called Cluanon at cluanon.substack.com. CLIUANON. The Virtue Hoarders is out with University of Minnesota Press. It is available free as an ebook on
Nice.
manifold.umn.edu. So you can get the ebook for free at any time. My other books, you can find me if you Google me. But Traumatized is coming out with Verso, and I'm really excited. And I just want to get out into the country and meet as many people as I can and talk about my research and talk about what they've been through. And please, subscribe to QAnon. Follow me on Twitter because I'm not going to Blue Sky. I don't want to be around this. I don't want to be around those people. And stay strong. And people like Bridget and me have not been silenced. So let that be um, some kind of comfort to you in these really fucked up times. So.
Yeah, we have your back. Anyone listening? Yeah, I'll link all of that in the show notes so people can easily find all of those references. But thank you so much, Catherine. You're a gem. You're the best. And like I said,
Thank
welcome
you.
back anytime. And
Thank
hope you have a
you.
good rest of your night.
Yeah, thanks so much.